killing themselves, which they are, you got to wonder. Trading briefly at around $100 a barrel, did oil prices hit a point at which customers the world over simply hit the wall? And now their economies too? Was OPEC too greedy for its own good? If so, this would not be the first time their thirst for an extra buck ultimately cost the organization. Remember $10 oil only a few years after those long gas lines in the late 70s and early 80s? Let's ask Kerr Trading International President Kevin Kerr. Kevin, is OPEC being screwed now by its selfishness?
Well, they've done this before, like you pointed out, Neil. I mean, they've been around this merry-go-round before. The problem is when the prices get this high, people innovate. We've seen this happen in the 80s after the high prices of the 70s. People started insulating their homes better, driving other cars.
Or that just drives into recession or a slowdown, right? And then you lose your customers anyway. Right?
Well, the thing is, you know, the recessions never last. They last a little while, but the changes stay. You know, you don't go in and rip out your insulation out of your house when you've improved and made it more energy efficient. So what happens is when that recession ends, and this one will too, and I think we are in one, it will end, but those changes will stay. And those changes this time around could be alternative fuels. We're seeing new technology come in. These things sit in place, and what happens is OPEC loses market share. It happened before when we saw those prices crash. Back between 1980 and 86, what we saw was an increase of about 10 million barrels a day, Neil, in non-OPEC production because of the high prices, and they didn't recover from that anytime soon after that.
Now, as you know, Kevin, and you've reported as well, you know, with the president, now the energy secretary, they're not exactly begging, but let's say strongly jawboning the Saudis to open up the spigot a little bit more, and the Saudis effectively say, you know, we like things the way they are. But they never learned that by kind of sticking it to the world on these high prices or this limited production, it only boomerangs on them, right?
Yeah, you know, the thing is this, it's really important to remember that OPEC is supposedly a business, and they are a business, actually. They're not a cartel. They don't have any enforcement mechanism, so even when they make promises to pump more, really the only enforcement they've had in the past is the extra spare capacity from the Saudis, and we're really not sure they have that anymore. So there really is no enforcement in the first place. The bottom line is that, you know, OPEC is going to do what they're going to do to make money. They are a business, and you know, at the end of the day, it's not a very smart business move when the world is in crisis to not at least say, hey, we're going to do what we can to help you out. They're not even doing that. So it's pretty unfortunate for them, I think, in the longer run.
You know, Kevin, I think we live in very interesting times, as the Chinese would say, and fast times. And the kind of oil disruptions we saw in the 70s and 80s when we were kids, I think is very different now because the kind of changes and the adjustments are rapid. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but if we're forced to look at more fuel-efficient vehicles alike, it seems to be short-lived. You know, we got to the $10 oil in the early 80s, but very quickly we got spoiled with that, we got sloppy with that, and we know the rest of that story. So maybe OPEC is looking at the long-term picture and saying, you know, we still have you over a barrel.
You know, they do. The old rule is, you know, those who have the gold make the rules. This is the golden rule. They have the oil. They make the rules. They realize that people do get lazy. Once prices come down, they'll probably start using again. I think this is a real wake-up call at these levels that, you know, hopefully we will see some widespread change, some subsidies for technology, not just corn-based ethanol, but other things, to try to wean ourselves off this addiction. It's pretty embarrassing to have these people going over and begging for more supply.
But, you know, really, but I don't know if that'll happen unless you have a sustained price point or a slowdown in all the world's economies that lasts more than what has been a typical recession, certainly in the United States, shallow, short, maybe 10 months tops.
Yeah, you're right, and you're exactly right in the fact that it has to be a significant price spike and it has to really impact people in the wallet. Now with food increases, you know, food price increases, we're seeing people really have to decide between staple foods or driving their car an extra few miles, and these are choices that really could drive some change. I'm not sure we're there yet, Neil. I'm not sure what that number is, but we're getting closer.
Okay, so I heard someone today, it might have been you, a very smart fellow, saying we will sooner get to $60 oil than $100 oil. Do you buy that? I
think there is some more premium, Neil, to get sucked out. Again, I don't know what that number is. Here at 88, you know, we could see prices drop back down to 75 or 70, but I just don't think we have the pullback capability going back to $10, $15, $30, or $50 even. And the reason for that is we have a whole different world now with more supply, less supply and more demand from places like China and India. This was not in the picture before. We have just a global growth story. Now, I understand with recession we could see a pullback in demand a little bit, but, you know, not enough to make it significant, not enough to send it back down to those kind of levels.
All right.
Down, yes, but not that far.
Thanks, Kev. I always appreciate your stopping by.
Sure, Neil. Thank you.
All right, here's the kind of stuff that Kevin and I were talking about, the economy and whether what's happening in the markets weighs on the economy or vice versa.